Right now, there is something quietly shaping the outcome of your life more than your circumstances, more than your past, and even more than what people have spoken over you. It is not what you are seeing, it is what you are repeatedly saying. Because the moment your words begin to change, your inner world begins to shift. And the moment your inner world shifts, your future direction starts to move with it. Stay with this, because what you are about to hear is not just information, it is a turning point for how you think, speak, and stand in faith from this moment forward. Let me ask you something that could completely change the direction of your life. What are you saying when life puts pressure on you? Not what you say when everything is going well. Not what you say when the answers are obvious. But what comes out of your mouth when challenges appear, when doors seem closed, when progress feels slow, and when circumstances are not cooperating with your expectations. Because in those moments, your words reveal far more than your emotions. They reveal the direction of your faith. Most people underestimate the power of their words. They think words are merely sounds, temporary reactions, or emotional expressions. But words are much more than that. Words reveal what is happening inside the heart, and over time, they help shape what the heart believes. This is why confession is such a powerful principle. Your confession is not simply what you say, it is what you continually agree with. Every day, whether you realize it or not, you are making confessions. When you say, "I'll never get through this," that is a confession. When you say, "Nothing ever works out for me," that is a confession. When you say, "I'm always struggling," that is a confession. And when those words are repeated often enough, they begin shaping expectation. What starts as speech eventually becomes belief. What becomes belief eventually influences decisions. And what influences decisions ultimately shapes direction. That is why the words coming out of your mouth matter so much. Now understand this clearly. Your words do not create reality by themselves, but they do shape your response to reality. They influence how you think, how you expect, and how you persevere. They either strengthen faith or strengthen fear. Think about two people facing the exact same challenge. One person says, "This situation is difficult, but I believe I will make it through." The other says, "This is impossible. I don't see any way forward." Both are facing the same circumstances, but their confessions are moving them in different directions. One confession builds resilience. The other confession builds discouragement. One confession strengthens expectation. The other confession strengthens doubt. This is why holding fast to your confession is so important. Life will constantly try to change your confession. Circumstances will attempt to convince you to speak fear. Delays will tempt you to speak discouragement. Setbacks will invite you to speak defeat. And if you are not intentional, your words will begin following your emotions instead of your faith. But faith speaks differently. Faith does not deny reality. Faith acknowledges challenges, but it refuses to let challenges have the final word. Faith says, "I may not see the answer yet, but I refuse to surrender my confidence." Faith says, "This season is difficult, but it is not permanent." Faith says, "I may be facing pressure, but I am not defeated." Notice the difference. Faith-filled confession is not pretending problems do not exist. It is choosing not to let problems define the future. Now here is something powerful. Your confession influences your expectation. People tend to move toward what they continually expect. If someone constantly speaks failure, they begin expecting failure. If someone continually speaks fear, they begin expecting disappointment. But when a person consistently speaks faith, expectation begins shifting. They start looking for opportunities instead of obstacles. They start noticing progress instead of only problems. They start anticipating breakthrough instead of assuming defeat. And that expectation changes how they live every day. Another important truth is that confession affects endurance. Many people do not lose battles because the challenge was too great. They lose because discouragement changed their confession. They stopped speaking faith. They stopped expecting good. They stopped believing that progress was possible. Their words changed before their circumstances changed. And once their confession changed, their confidence began weakening. This is why you must guard your words during difficult seasons. Anyone can speak positively when everything is easy. The true test of faith is maintaining the right confession when circumstances are still challenging. Can you continue speaking hope when results are delayed? Can you continue speaking confidence when progress feels slow? Can you continue speaking faith when emotions are trying to push you toward doubt? That is where spiritual strength is developed. Because every time you choose a faith-filled confession instead of a fear-filled confession, you are strengthening your inner foundation. You are training your mind to focus on possibility. You are teaching your heart to expect good. You are building resilience one declaration at a time. And over time, those repeated declarations become deeply rooted convictions. What once felt difficult to say becomes natural. What once required effort becomes your default response. And eventually, your confession stops being something you practice occasionally and becomes the way you live. So during this faith challenge, pay attention to your words. Pay attention to what you are repeatedly agreeing with, because your confession is shaping your faith journey every single day. And when you learn to hold fast to words of faith instead of surrendering to words of fear, you begin building a life marked by confidence, perseverance, and expectation even before visible results appear. Because the direction of your confession often becomes the direction of your life. Let me speak directly to those who are in a waiting season right now. You have prayed, you have believed, you have stood in faith. Yet when you look around, the circumstances seem unchanged. The answer has not fully appeared. The breakthrough has not yet arrived. And if you're not fearful, the greatest temptation in that moment is not to quit physically, it is to change your confession. This is where many people lose ground. They begin with confidence. They speak words of faith. They declare victory. They expect good things. But when time passes and visible results do not immediately appear, discouragement begins whispering. Doubt starts asking questions. Fear begins offering alternative conclusions. And slowly, many people start speaking differently. They don't always notice it at first. Their confession begins to shift from expectation to frustration, from confidence to uncertainty, from faith to fear. And this is exactly why holding fast to your confession is so important when circumstances appear unchanged. Because faith is never tested after the answer arrives. Faith is tested while you're waiting. Anyone can speak positively after the breakthrough. Anyone can celebrate after the victory. Anyone can express confidence after the problem is solved. But the true challenge is maintaining your confession before you see evidence. Think about a farmer who plants seeds in a field. The day after planting, he walks outside and sees nothing. The second day, he still sees nothing. The third day, the soil looks exactly the same. Now imagine if he concluded that the seed was not working simply because he could not yet see visible growth. That would be a mistake. Why? Because the process is happening beneath the surface before it becomes visible above the surface. Growth often begins where eyes cannot see it. The same principle applies to faith. Many people assume nothing is happening because they cannot yet see results. But visible evidence is not always the first sign of progress. Sometimes the process begins long before the outcome becomes visible. This is why your confession matters so much during seasons of waiting. Your words help determine whether you remain aligned with faith or drift toward discouragement when circumstances appear unchanged. The natural tendency is to talk about what you see. You see delay, so you speak delay. You see obstacles, so you speak obstacles. You see challenges, so you speak challenges. But faith-filled confession chooses a different focus. It acknowledges reality without surrendering to it. It says, I recognize the challenge, but I refuse to let the challenge determine my expectation. That is not denial. That is discipline. Because faith requires the discipline to remain consistent when emotions are inconsistent. Now consider how often people abandon their confidence too early. They are committed for a week, encouraged for a month, hopeful for a season. But when results take longer than expected, they begin lowering their expectations. Instead of saying, I am still believing, they start saying, maybe it's not meant to happen. Instead of saying, I'm confident, they start saying, I'm not sure anymore. Instead of saying, "The answer is coming," they start saying, "Nothing is changing." Notice what happened. The circumstances didn't necessarily change. The confession changed. And once the confession changed, the mindset began changing too. This is why holding fast is so important. Holding fast means refusing to let temporary appearances rewrite your convictions. It means remaining steady even when emotions fluctuate. It means continuing to speak faith when fear would be easier. And let me tell you something powerful. Consistency during waiting seasons develops strength that instant answers never could. Waiting reveals what you truly believe. Waiting exposes whether your confidence is rooted in circumstances or in conviction. Waiting teaches perseverance, and perseverance creates maturity. Many people want strong faith, but strong faith is often developed during periods when visible evidence is limited. Because when everything is visible, faith is not being stretched. When everything is obvious, trust is not being developed. But when circumstances appear unchanged and you continue holding fast, something important is happening inside you. Your confidence is becoming deeper. Your endurance is becoming stronger. Your focus is becoming more stable. And that internal development is valuable. Now understand this clearly. Holding fast does not mean pretending you never feel challenged. It does not mean ignoring emotions. It means refusing to let emotions become your final authority. There will be days when you feel discouraged, days when you feel tired, days when questions arise. That does not mean you have failed. It simply means you must return your focus to what you know rather than what you feel, because feelings change, circumstances change, but convictions must remain steady. So if you are in a season where the answer has not yet appeared, do not measure progress only by what is visible. Do not assume delay means defeat. Do not let temporary silence convince you that nothing is happening. Keep your confession strong. Keep your expectation alive. Keep your focus aligned with faith, because many breakthroughs are lost in the minds of people before they are ever lost in reality. And often the difference between those who persevere and those who give up is not that one had fewer challenges, it is that one continued holding fast to their confession while the other allowed circumstances to rewrite their belief. So stand firm, speak confidently, remain consistent, and remember, the greatest test of faith is not what you say. After you see the answer, it is what you continue saying while you are still waiting for it. Let's talk about one of the greatest enemies of faith, and one of the most common reasons people lose confidence long before their breakthrough arrives: negative speech. Many people think doubt begins in the mind, and that is partially true. Doubt often starts as a thought, a question, a fear, an uncertainty. But thoughts alone do not become strong unless they are continually accepted, repeated, and spoken. What begins as a passing thought becomes far more powerful when it becomes a repeated confession. That is why negative speech is so dangerous. Words give strength to thoughts. Words reinforce beliefs. Words train expectations. And when negative words are repeated long enough, they begin weakening spiritual confidence from the inside out. Think about how often people speak defeat without even realizing it. They say things like, "I'll never get ahead. This always happens to me. Nothing ever changes. I'm tired of believing. What's the point anymore?" At first, these may sound like emotional reactions, but repeated often enough, they become more than reactions. They become confessions. And confessions have influence because they shape what the heart begins to accept as true. The heart listens to what the mouth continually repeats. If you continually speak defeat, your heart begins expecting defeat. If you continually speak fear, your heart begins expecting fear. If you continually speak discouragement, your confidence begins shrinking. That is why doubt often enters through negative speech, not because words have magical power, but because repeated words gradually shape internal belief. Now understand something important. Doubt rarely arrives suddenly. Most people do not wake up one morning and instantly lose all confidence. Instead, doubt grows gradually. It begins with a negative thought, then a negative statement, then another statement, then repeated conversations focused on the problem. Eventually, the person starts rehearsing defeat more often than rehearsing faith, and little by little, confidence weakens. This is why you must pay attention to what you are repeatedly saying, because your words reveal what you are feeding. Whatever you continually speak, you are continually strengthening. Now let's be clear. This does not mean you must pretend challenges do not exist. Faith is not denial. Faith does not ignore reality. Faith acknowledges problems without surrendering to them. There is a difference. A person can say, this situation is difficult, but I believe I will get through it. That is honest and faith-filled. Another person can say, this situation is difficult, so there is no hope. That is honest, but it is also feeding discouragement. The challenge is not whether you acknowledge reality. The challenge is whether reality becomes the final conclusion. Negative speech turns temporary situations into permanent expectations. Faith-filled speech keeps the door open for possibility. And that difference matters more than many people realize. Think about how negative speech affects expectation. When someone constantly says, nothing ever works out, what happens? They stop looking for opportunities. They stop expecting progress. They stop believing positive outcomes are possible. Eventually, they begin interpreting every setback as proof that failure is inevitable. Their expectation has been trained by their confession. Now compare that to someone who says, I don't have all the answers, but I believe things can improve. That person remains open to possibility. They continue expecting growth. They continue looking forward rather than backward. And that expectation strengthens resilience. This is why your words matter so much during difficult seasons. The pressure of life will always try to pull negative speech out of you. Fear wants to be spoken. Discouragement wants to be spoken. Frustration wants to be spoken. And if you are not intentional, your mouth will begin agreeing with your fears instead of your faith. But every time you choose a faith-filled confession, something powerful happens. You interrupt the cycle of doubt. You stop reinforcing fear. You begin strengthening confidence again. At first, this may require discipline, because negative speech often becomes habitual. Many people have spent years speaking discouragement without realizing it. They automatically expect the worst, automatically focus on obstacles, automatically verbalize fear. Changing that pattern takes conscious effort, but it is possible. Every time you replace a negative confession with a faith-filled one, you are creating a new habit. You are training your mind differently. You are teaching your heart to expect differently. And over time, those new patterns become stronger. Now, here is something incredibly important. Your words not only affect you, they affect the atmosphere around you. People who constantly speak negativity often create environments filled with discouragement. But people who consistently speak faith create environments filled with hope and expectation. Their words encourage others. Their confidence inspires others. Their attitude lifts others. Because faith is contagious just as fear is contagious. That is why protecting your confession is not merely a personal discipline. It is also a way of protecting the atmosphere you live in every day. So be careful what you repeatedly say, not because you must speak perfectly, not because you must ignore challenges, but because your words are either strengthening faith or strengthening doubt. They are either building confidence or feeding discouragement. They are either reinforcing possibility or reinforcing fear. And over time, the voice you listen to most will often be your own. So choose words that strengthen your faith. Choose words that support your expectation. Choose words that align with hope rather than defeat. Because doubt often enters through negative speech, but faith grows stronger through words that consistently agree with truth, possibility, and confidence, even when circumstances have not yet changed. Let's talk about one of the simplest yet most powerful habits that can completely transform your faith journey. Speaking God's promises daily until they become stronger than your circumstances. Most people speak about their problems every day. They talk about what is wrong. They talk about what is delayed. They talk about what they fear. They talk about what they cannot see. And after a while, those conversations begin shaping their expectations. Their focus becomes centered on the problem rather than the promise. The challenge becomes larger in their mind than the possibility of change. But faith grows in a different environment. Faith grows where truth is repeated. Faith grows where promises are remembered. Faith grows where confidence is reinforced daily. That is why speaking God's promises is not merely a religious exercise. It is a process of building expectation and strengthening belief. Every time you speak a promise, you are reminding your heart of something greater than your current circumstances. You are choosing to focus on possibility instead of limitation. Now think about this carefully. Most people hear negative information repeatedly throughout the day. They hear bad news. They hear discouraging opinions. They hear fearful predictions. They hear stories, failure and disappointment. And every piece of information influences their thinking in some way. If negative information is repeated enough, it begins shaping expectation. The same principle works in the opposite direction. When God's promises are repeated consistently, they begin shaping expectation too. The heart naturally moves toward whatever it hears most often. If it hears fear most often, fear grows. If it hears doubt most often, doubt grows. If it hears faith most often, faith grows. This is why daily confession matters so much. It is not about trying to convince God of something. It is about strengthening your own confidence. Every time you speak a promise, you are renewing your focus. You are redirecting your attention. You are reminding yourself of what is true, even when circumstances try to suggest otherwise. And that repetition has power. Think about how habits are formed. No one becomes skilled at something through a single action. Skills are developed through repetition. Muscles are strengthened through repetition. Learning happens through repetition. And faith is strengthened the same way. One declaration may encourage you for a moment, but daily declarations build a foundation. Over time, those repeated words move from your mouth into your heart. They become more than statements. They become convictions. And convictions are powerful because they remain steady when emotions fluctuate. There will be days when you feel confident. There will be days when you feel uncertain. There will be days when circumstances appear favorable. There will be days when circumstances appear discouraging. But if your confidence is built only on feelings, it will rise and fall constantly. When confidence is built on promises, it becomes more stable. This is why speaking God's promises daily creates expectation. Expectation is one of the most important forces in a person's life. People tend to move in the direction of what they expect. Someone who expects failure often approaches opportunities with hesitation. Someone who expects disappointment often prepares emotionally for defeat before anything has even happened. But someone who expects good remains open to possibility. They continue looking forward. They continue believing progress is possible. They continue moving with confidence. And that expectation influences every area of life. Now understand something important. Expectation does not mean demanding specific outcomes. It means maintaining confidence that God is faithful regardless of timing. Many people lose hope because they attach expectation to a schedule. They decide when something should happen. Then, when it does not happen according to their timeline, discouragement enters. But faith-filled expectation is different. It remains confident even when timing is unclear. It continues believing even when results are delayed. It keeps looking forward rather than giving up. And daily confession helps maintain that mindset. Every promise you speak becomes a reminder that your circumstances are not the final authority. Every promise becomes a declaration that possibility still exists. Every promise becomes a reinforcement of faith. Now here is another reason this practice is so powerful. Daily confession protects your mind from drifting toward negativity. The human mind naturally pays attention to problems. Challenges demand attention. Difficulties attract focus. If left unchecked, the mind can become consumed with obstacles. Speaking promises interrupts that pattern. It redirects attention from fear to faith, from limitation to possibility, from discouragement to hope. And over time, that repeated focus begins changing how you think. You become less reactive to setbacks, less controlled by temporary circumstances, less vulnerable to discouragement. Why? Because your mind has been trained to return to truth instead of remaining trapped in fear. And eventually something remarkable happens. The promises you once repeated because you needed encouragement become the convictions you live by every day. What started as a discipline becomes a lifestyle. What started as intentional confession becomes your natural response. You stop automatically speaking defeat. You stop immediately assuming the worst. You stop letting every challenge determine your outlook. Instead, your first response becomes faith. Your first response becomes confidence. Your first response becomes expectation. So make it a daily habit to speak God's promises, not because circumstances always change immediately, not because every answer appears overnight, but because every promise you speak strengthens your faith, renews your focus, and builds the expectation that keeps you moving forward. And often, the strongest faith is not developed in a single dramatic moment. It is built one day at a time through consistent agreement with truth until that truth becomes stronger than every circumstance trying to challenge it. Let's go deeper into one of the most important truths in the entire life of faith. There is a direct connection between what you believe in your heart and what you consistently say with your mouth. Many people separate these two things. They think belief is internal and confession is external, and that they do not necessarily influence each other. But in reality, they are deeply connected. What is in the heart influences the mouth, and what is repeatedly spoken also influences what the heart becomes. Convinced of over time. This is why your words are never just words. They are reflections of belief, and they are also seeds that reinforce belief. Think about it like this. The heart is not just a storage place for ideas. It is also a place where ideas are strengthened through repetition. Every time you think something, you are reinforcing a pattern. Every time you speak something, you are strengthening that pattern even more. So if a person believes fear internally but speaks fear externally, fear becomes more deeply rooted. If a person believes doubt internally and speaks doubt externally, that doubt becomes stronger. But the opposite is also true. If a person begins to speak faith consistently, even when emotions are not fully aligned, something begins to shift internally over time. The heart slowly starts adjusting to what the mouth keeps repeating. Now, this is where many people misunderstand faith. They think they must only speak what they currently feel, but feelings are not always stable. Feelings change from day to day, sometimes even moment to moment. If your confession is always tied to your feelings, your faith will constantly fluctuate. One day you feel strong, so you speak strong words. Another day you feel weak, so you speak weak words. Another day you feel uncertain, so your words become uncertain. And over time, that inconsistency creates instability in your inner life. But faith-filled confession is different. It is not based on temporary feelings. It is based on chosen agreement. It is choosing to align your words with truth rather than emotion. And this is where spiritual strength begins to develop. Because when you consistently speak truth, even when you do not fully feel it yet, you are training your heart to align with that truth. At first, it may feel like effort. You may say words of faith while still feeling pressure. You may declare confidence while still experiencing uncertainty. But repetition creates transformation. Just like a pathway is formed by walking the same ground repeatedly, inner belief is shaped by repeated speech. Now consider how powerful this becomes in daily life. Every conversation you have is either reinforcing faith or reinforcing doubt. Every statement you make about your situation is either building confidence or weakening it. Every repeated phrase becomes part of your internal foundation. This is why inconsistency in confession creates instability in belief, and consistency in confession creates strength in belief. Over time, something powerful begins to happen. The words you once had to force yourself to say become natural. What once felt like effort becomes your default language. You stop automatically speaking defeat. You stop immediately agreeing with fear. You begin responding differently to challenges, not because circumstances have changed, but because your internal pattern of speech has changed. And that internal change is extremely important, because life is not only shaped by events it is also shaped by interpretation. Two people can go through the same situation but interpret it completely differently based on what they believe and what they consistently say. One person sees delay and says, "Nothing is working." Another person sees delay and says, "Something is still developing." One person sees difficulty and says, "This is too much." Another person sees difficulty and says, I will grow through this. The difference is not only circumstances, the difference is for internal agreement shaped by repeated confession. Now here is something very important. The mouth often reveals what the heart has been rehearsing. If negativity has been rehearsed internally, it will eventually come out verbally. If faith has been rehearsed internally, it will eventually come out verbally. But here is the powerful part: this process can also be reversed. When you intentionally begin speaking faith consistently, even if your internal feelings are still catching up, you are planting new patterns into your heart. And over time, those patterns begin to grow. Your internal agreement begins shifting. Your expectations begin changing. Your reactions begin stabilizing. And your confidence begins strengthening. This is why confession is not just expression, it is formation. It forms how you think. It forms how you expect. It forms how you respond. And it forms how you endure. So when you connect belief in the heart with confession of the mouth, you are creating a powerful cycle. Belief influences speech. Speech reinforces belief. And repetition strengthens both. And eventually what you continually speak becomes what you continually expect, and what you continually expect becomes the direction your life naturally moves toward. Let's go deeper into one of the most critical turning points in any person's faith journey. How you respond when setbacks happen determines whether your faith grows stronger or begins to weaken. Everyone experiences setbacks. No one is exempt. There are moments when things do not go as expected. Prayers seem unanswered. Progress feels delayed. Doors appear closed. Efforts seem to produce little visible result. And in those moments, the real test is not whether you believe in good times, but whether you maintain your confession in difficult times. Because setbacks are not just external events, they are internal tests. They test your patience. They test your expectation. They test your consistency. And most importantly, they test your confession. Now understand something clearly. Setbacks do not automatically mean failure, but they do create pressure. And pressure reveals what is truly inside. When pressure increases, people often begin speaking what they truly believe rather than what they wish to believe. That is why some people start strong in faith but weaken in confession when challenges continue. They begin speaking differently, not because their situation changed, but because their endurance was tested. And this is where many people lose progress they have already made internally. Because the moment confession changes, expectation begins shifting. And when expectation shifts downward, confidence follows. Think about it like this. Faith is not only about what you believe when you pray, it is also about what you continue saying after you pray. Many people pray with faith but speak with doubt afterward. They declare promises in prayer but speak fear in daily life. They believe for breakthrough in moments of prayer, but rehearse disappointment in moments of reflection. And over time, that inconsistency creates internal conflict. Setbacks amplify that conflict, because when visible results delay, the pressure to change confession increases. The mind begins asking questions like, what if nothing is happening? Or what if I was wrong to believe? Or what if this never changes? And if those questions are allowed to dominate, confession begins shifting toward doubt. But faith responds differently too. Setbacks. Faith does not deny the existence of difficulty, but it refuses to let difficulty redefine expectation. Faith says, this is challenging, but it is not final. Faith says, this delay does not cancel the promise. Faith says, what I do not see yet does not mean it is not developing. Now here is something very important. Setbacks often reveal whether your faith is based on immediate results or long-term conviction. If faith is based only on immediate results, it will weaken quickly when results are delayed. But if faith is based on conviction, it remains steady even when results take longer than expected. And conviction is strengthened through consistent confession. Every time you continue speaking truth during setbacks, you are strengthening your inner foundation. Every time you refuse to surrender to negative speech, you are reinforcing stability. Every time you choose faith-filled words over fear-filled words, you are building endurance. Now think about how endurance works in life. Endurance is not developed when everything is easy. It is developed when challenges continue, but you remain steady. And confession plays a major role in that stability, because what you repeatedly say during setbacks determines whether you collapse internally or continue standing strong. Many people give up not because the situation defeated them, but because their confession weakened before the situation changed. They stopped speaking hope. They stopped expecting progress. They stopped reinforcing faith. And once confession changed, their mindset followed. But those who learn to hold steady in their confession during setbacks develop something powerful: resilience. Resilience is the ability to remain spiritually and mentally stable even when circumstances are unstable. It does not mean you never feel pressure. It means pressure does not determine your direction. It means challenges do not control your expectation. It means delays do not rewrite your belief. And resilience is built through repetition, through repeatedly choosing faith-filled confession even when emotions try to pull you in another direction. Now here is another important truth. Setbacks often come with opportunities to reset focus. When everything is going smoothly, it is easy to drift into distraction. But when challenges arise, focus becomes sharper. And in that sharpening process, confession becomes even more important. Because what you say during pressure determines whether pressure breaks you or builds you. If you speak defeat, pressure becomes heavier. If you speak faith, pressure becomes manageable. Not because circumstances immediately change, but because your internal strength increases. And over time, something begins to shift. Setbacks no longer define you. Delays no longer discourage you as easily. Challenges no longer silence your confession. Instead, your words become more stable, your expectation becomes stronger, and your confidence becomes more rooted. Eventually, you reach a point where setbacks no longer change your confession, they only refine your endurance. So understand this clearly. Setbacks are not just obstacles, they are opportunities to strengthen your confession. And every time you choose to speak faith in the middle of difficulty, you are not just reacting to circumstances, you are building a deeper level of spiritual strength that prepares you for the breakthrough that is still ahead, even when you cannot yet see it. Let's go deeper into something that brings everything together in a very practical way. Faith is not proven in moments of ease, but in the consistency of a life that refuses to quit speaking truth, even when everything feels delayed. Many people misunderstand faith as a single moment of strong belief. They think if they prayed strongly once, or believed deeply once, or declared something boldly once, that should be enough to guarantee results. But faith is not measured by a single moment, it is revealed through sustained consistency over time. And that is why completing a faith challenge is not just about what you do for a few days or nights. It is about what begins to change in your inner life during that process. Because when you commit to consistently holding fast to your confession, something begins to shift beneath the surface. At first, it may feel like repetition. You are speaking the same truths again and again. You are declaring the same promises again and again. You are reminding yourself of the same principles again and again. And the natural mind may begin to wonder, why do I need to keep saying this? But repetition is not wasted effort. Repetition is reinforcement. Every time you repeat a faith-filled confession, you are not trying to convince God, you are strengthening your own inner alignment. You are training your mind to stay focused. You are training your heart to remain steady. You are building an internal structure that becomes more stable than external circumstances. And over time, something very important begins to happen. What you used to say by discipline begins to become your natural response. That is transformation. Because at the beginning, faith often requires effort. You have to choose your words carefully. You have to correct your thoughts. You have to resist negative speech. You have to intentionally align yourself with truth. But as consistency continues, that effort begins to decrease. Your thinking starts shifting. Your reactions start changing. Your speech becomes more stable. And eventually, faith becomes your default language. Now understand this clearly. This transformation does not happen overnight. It happens through steady, repeated commitment. And that is why many people miss out on deeper spiritual stability. They stop too early. They start strong, but do not continue long enough for inner change to fully develop. But those who stay consistent begin to notice something powerful. Their internal world becomes more stable. They are less shaken by sudden news. They are less controlled by temporary emotions. They are less influenced by external pressure. Why? Because their confession has trained their inner life to remain anchored. And when your inner life is anchored, external storms lose some of their ability to destabilize you. Now consider how this affects daily living. When a challenge appears, instead of immediately speaking fear, you begin to pause. When uncertainty arises, instead of automatically speaking doubt, you begin to recall truth. When delay happens, instead of quickly assuming failure, you begin to maintain expectation. This shift is not accidental. It is the result of repeated confession shaping your internal responses. And over time, this creates something very valuable: spiritual resilience. Resilience is not just endurance. It is steady confidence under pressure. It is the ability to remain stable while circumstances are unstable. It is the strength to continue speaking truth, even when everything around you is trying to pull you into discouragement. And resilience is built through consistency, not occasional effort, not temporary inspiration, but repeated intentional confession that aligns your heart with truth. Now here is one of the most important insights in this entire journey. What you consistently say eventually becomes what you naturally expect. Expectation is not random. It is trained. If you consistently speak defeat, you begin expecting defeat. If you consistently speak uncertainty, you begin expecting confusion. But if you consistently speak faith, you begin expecting possibility. And expectation shapes how you live. It shapes how you pray. It shapes how you respond. It shapes how you handle delays. It shapes how you interpret circumstances. So when you complete a faith challenge like this, the real result is not just words spoken over a period of time. It is the gradual formation of a new internal expectation system, one that is not easily shaken by temporary conditions, one that is rooted in truth rather than emotion, one that remains steady even when answers are delayed. And that is where true spiritual strength begins to show, because strong faith is not loud faith. Strong faith is consistent faith. It is the kind of faith that continues speaking when silence feels easier. It continues believing when results are not immediate. It continues standing when emotions fluctuate. And it continues confessing truth until that truth becomes deeply established within the heart. So as you complete this journey, understand what is really happening. You are not just repeating words who are reshaping your inner life. You are not just speaking statements who are building conviction. You are not just finishing a challenge. You are developing a lifestyle of consistent confession that strengthens your faith, stabilizes your expectation, and prepares you to stand firm no matter what season you walk into next. So as you finish this challenge, don't let your confession weaken the moment the pressure returns. Let what you've been speaking become what you live, not just what you repeated for a season. Because your words are not small, they are shaping your expectation, your endurance, and your direction more than you realize. Now take this forward deliberately. Hold fast to your confession, refuse to speak defeat, and stay aligned with truth even when results are not immediate. And if you continue speaking faith when everything around you says otherwise, you won't just complete a challenge, you will step into a lifestyle where your words, your belief, and your expectation begin moving in one direction toward victory.